and welcome to the 8th episode of the Network podcast for Assassin's Creed Initiates. I'm Andy, one of your community managers on Assassin's Creed and your host. I'm joined as always by Gabe Graziani, who is the senior comm dev on Assassin's Creed. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. 8 episodes. That's actually, I'm a bit surprised to hear that for some reason.
We're getting close to the big 1-0. And we're extremely pleased and honored to be joined by Alex Amancio, who is the creative director on Assassin's Creed Unity. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Hey.
Awesome. So, got another power guest on. And so we're going to be talking to Alex, obviously, about Assassin's Creed Unity. And we're going to jump straight into it. I would like Alex to give us a little bit of an intro to himself. Tell us a little bit about your role as a creative director and what your duties are on Assassin's Creed Unity.
All right. As creative director, I'm ultimately responsible for the overall vision of the game. So the game usually starts with a very small core team, of which I am part, and then we essentially, one representative from each of the different core elements that make up a game. So you have somebody from mission, you have somebody from narrative, usually you have somebody from programming side, and a very small team, and we start talking about what this game is going to be about, and we start from there, and then from this one single concept, everything sort of grows. And then the job of creative director essentially evolves from that and becomes one of sort of communicating with each individual director that make up the core team, trying to evolve their vision and trying to fit that entirety of the vision into the global vision. And then as the game continues progressing and the team grows more and more, it's making sure that every different part of what makes up the game, all these satellite departments are all working in conjunction and trying to strive for that same vision, right? So that nobody sort of strays off course. And essentially then at the end, it evolves a little bit more towards communicating this vision to the exterior, the outside world, right? To fans, to journalists, stuff like that.
Okay, so that sounds like a particularly hard job because obviously you're in charge of so many people, and you have to make sure that the message that you're sending filters down to everyone, right? What's your work week like?
It's a bit hectic, but you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. The thing about being a creative director is that your job is never really the same, and it's part of what really makes it fun. You have this plan for the game, and then the cool part about it is that you need to always keep in touch with what's actually happening on the floor in order to ensure that actually happens, because a lot of times you hit walls, you have to adapt, you have to talk to a lot of different people, you have to be interested in a lot of different subject matters, you have to at least know functional knowledge of a lot of different subjects, so that you can sort of wrangle all of that in your head and try to, always try to keep that ultimate goal and try to keep that, the team from being able to actually reach it.
So, in order to prepare yourself for that, what is the career path that leads up to creative director? Maybe give us an idea of some of your work history prior to being a creative director.
Well, every creative director's path to becoming a creative director is somewhat different. I don't know any two that actually have the same path. In my case, I actually started from, the art department. And before that, I started schooling. I was going to be probably a physicist or something. I started studying in science. And then when computer graphics became a thing, there was a couple of schools that opened in Montreal that taught computer graphics, and I felt that I had seen Jurassic Park and films like that, and it was awesome to me, the ability to reconstruct these visuals, these universes, these characters from nothing in a computer. And so I essentially left the path that I had started in school, which was more of a science path, and then went to that 3D schooling. I did that. And eventually started working in the flight simulator industry. I did military flight sims for NATO, like a bunch of different clients, and it was really cool because it was. I had a sort of a secret clearance, and I got all these different files, and I had to reconstruct these airports, and so it was really interesting. But at one point, I felt that. Creatively, it wasn't that satisfying. I felt that after it was close to 4 years, I felt that I needed something that was a little bit more creative. I had always also, like in my spare time, I had always been somewhat of a writer. So anyways, I decided to leave this industry, and I've been an avid gamer ever since I can remember. I applied to a gaming company, and they hired me as a lead artist. My first game was actually a tennis game, which was a really smooth way of transitioning into the industry. And then, at one point, I moved from that small company to Ubisoft as art director on Far Cry 2. The interesting part about that challenge was the fact that because we were shifting generations, we essentially were going from the old, Xbox One or PS2 to the PS3 and then Xbox 360. The major challenge was not only in creating the actual world of Far Cry 2, but creating the pipeline that allowed us to have this huge open world with the quality of graphics that it had on consoles. So I was always, again, a little bit more technical in my approach. And then once I did that, I felt like I needed to shift towards something else. Creative direction was something that I had my eye on for some time. And at one point, Ubisoft gave me a shot. They decided to let me try to evolve my career into that branch. And it was Seb Puel, who was the executive producer on Assassin's Creed, that essentially offered me a job as creative director on Revelations. And then, I evolved from there.
That's actually a pretty impressive career path. I think the tennis game really helped. No, and you mentioned Revelations, which I know a lot of people who are listening to this were big fans of. And so it's impressive it's important to understand that, like, you've been at the beginning of sort of two transitional periods in terms of gaming generations. Like, you had Far Cry, which was at that movement to the PS2 and stuff, and then now we've got Unity, which is onto the new generation. But actually, speaking of, so while we're on the subject of that, let's talk about Unity, because this has been in development for how long now?
Close to 4 years.
Wow, that would have been after Brotherhood?
Yes.
Pretty much straight out.
Exactly. Right after Brotherhood, a small tech team started working on it, because since this was going to be the first new gen title, they had to start building the groundwork for the engine. Because one thing that's worth noting is that for every single one of our AC games, we have a lot of engineers working, right? So we never content ourselves with what was achieved in the previous game. However, nothing as ambitious as this. We haven't done anything as ambitious in terms of on the tech side since AC1, when we actually built the engine. So the team started working right after Brotherhood, trying to start building the foundations for the engine. And at that time, I started on Revelations. And essentially, the two worked in parallel, Unity, the engine stuff, and Revelations. And then once I was finished, after a short hiatus, I came back and took the helm on Unity.
Okay. And that's on the technical side. What about sort of like the story and the narrative? Because I'm aware that you had a big part in that, alongside obviously the writers on the team. But can you tell us a little bit of how that came to be? What where that seed was planted, as it were, and how Unity became a thing narratively.
So when I joined the project, it was one of the first things that I started working on, was trying to figure out what the narrative was going to be. And the decision was taken really early on to make this not a game about the French Revolution, but to use it as a backdrop. And this stems from the fact that if you look at AC2 and Brotherhood, for example, even Revelations, the game is set. These games are set in a time period, but they're not set during a specific set of very, very documented events. Certainly there's stuff that happens in Brotherhood and AC2 and Revelations that you can attribute to a certain period of history, but it's not about that, right? If you look at AC3, for example, it is about the American Revolution mostly, right? So we wanted to go back to something that was more like the other ones, like we take a very iconic time period, and we set the game in that time period. We tied to a lot of the different events, but without making that the core of the experience. So that was one of the first things. And then we started working on the characters. Arnaud, Elise, trying to figure out which historical characters would be included in the story. I mean, the Marquis de Sade, Napoleon, a lot of the very famous French Revolution people, Mirabeau, Robespierre, obviously, the king. So it sort of started from there. And that was sort of the first thing. And we didn't have a writer. So I worked myself on a lot of the outline of the story. So try to figure out what the major beats were, essentially what each sequence was going to be about, and the sequence of events, and the whole narrative arc. And once that was sort of achieved, we did a week blueprint. So a bunch of us from the core team, we left off-site, and I arrived there with the outline that I had worked on. And we essentially started, adding more detail to it. So adding contextual missions. So what we did was I arrived with this, PowerPoint document, just text, right, with each slide representing a mission, a possible mission, or a narrative beat. And the whole team sort of arrived with, especially the mission designers, arrived with, cue cards with different mission themes. Just crazy ideas for cool missions. And then you start taking those different cards and trying to look at the different narrative beats and try to construct something coherent. Like, for example, here, we need something where you need to figure out where the, this bad guy secret bases or whatever, and somebody has a really cool theme. Yeah, what if we're doing that, but while you're being followed, and then you try to sort of piece it together and try to create these really original contexts within this narrative constraint. And once we had finished this, we started looking for a writer, and we found this really cool young writer called Travis Stout in the States. And we essentially, I sent him the outline, asked him if this is something that he would like to work on, and he did. And so he joined us very, very quickly.
That's interesting, because I think throughout this podcast series, I feel like we get a really good, we get a much closer glimpse of how games are actually made, because we have questions from fans all the time, and I think a lot of the perception. I mean, I remember when I worked for press, I had the perception that there's a very set procedure. Like there's a very set, like you work on the game. You at some level, it's not level 1, level 2, level 3, and we didn't have time to do level 4 or whatever, right? But it's not even that sequential, right? Like you start, and it's engineers that are working on prototypes that are like, is it possible for these two boxes to behave this way, right? Where they don't even have personalities.
Well, yeah, I'll give you an example of one thing we knew we wanted to do. Like AC1 was known for its crowds, right? It was 200 people. I mean, and back then it was revolutionary. So one thing we knew was, well, let's try to impress people again with crowds. How many people can we actually have on screen? So they started working on this technology where we could have what we call bulk crowds, meaning crowds of thousands of people, and then exactly how many thousands we can have. So no matter where the game was going, we knew that crowds were going to be a part of it because they were part of the first one. It was part of what impressed people. Another thing they started working on was the graphical engine. We knew that this graphical engine needed a overhaul. The way we handled, shaders was a little bit antiquated, especially if you're talking about the next generation. So we completely redid the shader engine. It's now based on physically based materials, so they look much more realistic. The lighting is different. I mean, we actually calculate ambient occlusion now. That's like photonic impacts, which means that, the little subtleties, most of everything that, why everything looks so great in reality, it's light and shadow. And the closer you are to representing the true effects of light in a game, the more everything is going to look amazing. You don't need millions upon millions and millions of polygons. I mean, there's only so much polygons can do. If something looks smooth, if you triple the amount of polygons, it's not going to look smoother, right? It's the shaders and the lighting is where everything happens. So this is something that we also rewrote from the ground up. And then we went from there. Like another thing we wanted to do was, talking about the tech is, we've never had real interiors. I mean, aside from the ones that you actually load. I mean, and a lot of people love the linear gameplay sequences we had before. We call them the LGSs. Those, the sequences where in Revelations you would go into a monument and you'd have more of a linear sort of navigation gameplay. The reason we first started doing these back in AC2 was simply because we had these amazing landmarks, and we asked ourselves, wouldn't it be cool to actually be able to go into them? Because, I mean, but we need, if you actually load an interior, then what do you do inside? We need to figure something out. What about navigation? That's very contemplative. It'll let people, just take their time and look at the beauty of the environment. This is why we started doing them, right? But what we asked ourselves in Unity was, okay, well, what if we actually just have interiors be seamless in the experience, add that new dimension? And I'm actually surprised how people take it for granted now, even as we're playtesting it, because it's adding such a new dimension to the game. Where you're actually, think about it. You're running away from guards in the street. You go in through a doorway, go up the stairs, jump out the window into a rooftop. That's a completely new dimension that we've never had before. And not to mention the stories that can happen in these interiors, right? There's like people in there, there's like props, there's paintings, there's collectibles. So, yeah.
It's a super organic chase breaker, really. Oh, yeah. It's just the natural thing. That's what it's funny that you mentioned being, like getting used to it, right? Because there's some things occasionally, like when I'm playing, that really surprise me. One of the things is that it seems like almost inevitably, like there's a day and a night cycle, but the huge bulk of that time is magic hour, right? Like it's always like everything's always this like luscious, like golden, like it just looks so good, and it's exactly the lighting, right? I remember when I was in art school, what they would always tell us is if you're gonna paint something, just record what the light is doing. That's all you have to do, is just get where it's light and dark. If you're gonna do something with charcoal, that's what you're doing. That's what a camera does. Yeah. And in order to make a good photo, you want to get something that where the light is doing something interesting. So it's intense to me that being the core focus of the team to try and make things look really good is to focus on that light and the shaders and things like that. It's really helps me look at the game in a completely different way, right? Because I always knew it looked gorgeous. I just didn't know why.
It's the light.
And I wanted to, you did mention with the interiors and stuff, sort of the stories. And I wanted to kind of go back onto that, because one of the things that Unity has, obviously these stories that can happen inside, is some of the side content that fits into the narrative. Things like we just recently talked about on a previous ComDev Q&A that Gabe did, murder mysteries. And that fascinates me, because it's like, just walking into an interior of a building and maybe somebody's wailing because there's been a murder, something happens on the ground, and then you proceed to find the clues and stuff. How did that come about? I know a different writer took the bulk of that, right?
Yep. And okay, so the idea of all those side things, where it came from. Once you start building a very large world, and then you start making it full scale, which means you start building interiors, it starts looking more and feeling more and more like a real actual world, rather than a film set, for example, where you only have the facades but there's really nothing inside. So the idea was that if we're going to build and invest and create this city that looks and feels real, then if you don't fill it with stories, the suspension of disbelief is going to be broken, because it will feel like this very realistic simulation. That was always, we always knew that we had to do something to fill the world, to really make it feel more alive, something that would be interactive, that wouldn't just be like a set dressing. And then at the same time, we were struggling with one very real issue, and that is, how do you make a next-gen open world game feel next-gen? I could say new gen now, because now it is the new gen. Back when we started, it was next gen. So the idea is that the way we did it before is that your main motivation when playing the game is actually to complete the main narrative, which, when you think about it, it really pushes you against the whole concept of partaking in an open world, because the narrative wants to push you forward, the open world wants you to contemplate and explore and do stuff. So by having different stories within the same game, and having all of these stories having the player get to choose and pick which stories he wants to partake in, starts creating another meta-narrative over the individual narratives that we're saying. And this meta-narrative is the player's experience. Your path through the game becomes your own unique story. You haven't done the same side stories that I did. None of us have, and that's the whole point, or even the order in which you do them and how you stumble upon them. You were talking about stumbling upon a dead body, stuff like that. The only issue we had with that was, okay, if we're going to do this, the player has to have a motivation to do it. Because the motivation for completing a linear story is simple. It's the urgency of the narrative. So this is when we started adding all of this stuff where we would add different collectibles, different gear, and start adding all the whole customization angle to the game. It really motivates you. The reason you're doing this is because every single mission that you do in this open world will actually be benefiting your progression. And Arnaud's progression is the glue that gels everything together. And this to us was very next gen. So this is where the idea came from for the concept of actually creating these stories. And then we started thinking about, what kind of stories could we be telling? I mean, something that actually, first of all, touches upon the core pillars of the game. So navigation, stealth, and combat. But also maybe stuff that would push pillars that we seldom, if ever, push on the series. Murder mysteries are a perfect example because I think this addresses something that I felt was always something that was missing from AC. If you look at all the different challenge, every gameplay element always challenges something. I mean, this is how we generate fun and an addiction in terms of how something that's fun, enjoyable. You need to challenge the player either on his reflexes, on his observation, stuff like that. And different pillars. I mean, the combat, for example, is stressing you on many different pillars. I mean, it's your reflexes, your capacity for analyzing what the enemy is doing and then reacting. Navigation is a flow experience. But we had never had, in AC, at least in the main path, we had never had anything that called upon your deduction, your smarts. And the reason you sort of try to stay away from this, especially in main path stuff, is that if you're asking the player to deduce something and to actually resolve problem, you're incurring the real risk of the player not being able to resolve that and then being stuck. And the last thing you want is players to have to go on the internet to find an answer. So we tend, at least on AC, we tend to stay away from challenging players on that, on their power of analysis and deduction. But because these things are all side stories, we could afford to do so. So murder mysteries were designed to be a type of mission where you actually challenge players on their observation and deduction skills. So to be detectives, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I'm most looking forward to, and I can imagine a lot of fans will be as well, because it's like you've said, you have to deduce, you find the clues, you have to deduce who's maybe committed the murder, and then the best bit is you can accuse someone, yep. But you can accuse the wrong people. You can throw the wrong person in jail.
Actually, we and I communicated about this in the past, and we actually could at one point, and we changed that. You could actually put the wrong person in jail. Now, what we do is, if you actually accuse the wrong person, your reward goes down, and the more wrong people you accuse, the more your reward goes down.
Yeah, I have to admit, it was really satisfying to accuse the person, and it's just like, you got it in one, and I'm just like, yes.
Yeah.
Because it was, I mean, it's funny when you're actually engaged with, listening to people tell you things and describe facts to you in the game. All of a sudden, you're just like, oh wow, I need to pay attention to this. Games don't usually ask that of you in that way, right? Where it's like, it's usually a reflex challenge, right? That's what you're trying to do. Get here, accomplish this objective by beating all these guys or something like that. Do this. It's very rarely answer this riddle.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we tried to do this in all aspects of the game, even the way we built our open-ended black box missions. The idea is that, of course, you can do it the simple way, right? Walk through the front door, try to fight your way in, or try to stealth your way in. But if you really have a lot of observation skills or imagination, really want to try crazy stuff and try to figure out a really unique way of doing it, we let you do that. And I mean, it's part of that same idea of allowing players to sort of stray away from the beaten path of just following a set of instructions and trying to let them express themselves in the way they play a little bit more. I think that's very next gen. I mean, new gen, I should say.
So, I mean, we since I think that bridges pretty well into my next question, actually, which is we're talking about how new Unity is, how many new things it does, But are there games or experiences in your life that contributed to what you wanted to do with Unity?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's tons. I mean, look, just going back to a small isometric game called XCOM. Remember the old XCOMs?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, the narrative that was being told was really, really simple. I mean, okay, aliens are coming. You need to land your ship and take care of these aliens. But the way that you're moving your XCOM soldiers around, the way that you're discovering these enemies, the surprise you're running into when stuff starts going badly, and then you think you're dead, but one of your guys gets that head kill shot and kills and saves everybody. You start making all these stories in your mind, right? And you start really adding, you start feeling stuff for these characters that are essentially like these, 32 pixel high characters, right? And you really start creating attachment because of actual gameplay, because of the stuff that happens randomly and in a single playthrough. And the idea of this, I mean, I think is really well I think it's really well explored in Far Cry 2 game that I worked on, and this is what we were sort of trying to do, right, with the buddy system and all that stuff, creating we called it sort of an anecdote engine, trying to create a game where the underlying systems would favor emergence. And I mean, certainly there was room for evolution in that game, and I think Far Cry 3 added a lot of the more that gamification layer on top of Far Cry 2 that sort of exposed that stuff to become a little bit more mainstream. But the idea is still the same, right? It's creating these situations where you do have a narrative that's been written and directed by developers, but the game, the way it's structured, the way it's set up, is that it leaves room for the story that each individual player will be having within that world. This is, again, if you look at Unity, the way it's structured, of course we still have that very important main narrative. The story is super important, as it always has been Assassin's Creed. It's as ambitious, even more so because of New Gen. But then we've added these hundreds of little stories that are spread out through Paris. And again, the cool part is that as you're walking around Paris, as you're stumbling upon these stories, you're creating your own meta-narrative. And then, if you look at the way that we actually structured the world itself with the AI, multiple factions fighting, and these different non-player-centric approaches that we've had, it's really creating the backbone for that systemic nature that will guarantee that your experience within Paris will feel like a real experience through a real simulation of Paris.
Oh, that's actually really cool. And I mean, it flows into the co-op as well, right? Because I mean, there's a narrative to a certain extent in the co-op, in that like that stuff that was happening with the Brotherhood at the same, and Arno sometimes participated in those missions, and it's great because it's really easy to do. It's not it's not cumbersome, at least when we've played it. You can just walk up to a mission given, you just jump in with your friends and do that, and it feels right. It feels like I'm particularly looking forward to heists. We got some really good reception from the Gamescom demo. It was that I believe you did, and you commented over. So looking forward to playing those heists. Is there any? What's your favorite part of it, Gabe? What's your favorite part of the game so far?
Of the game so far? Well, I have to admit, like, I haven't played. I'm most excited to see the co-op, and I haven't actually played that much of it yet. Like, we haven't gotten a whole huge opportunity to do it. I mean, I played it a little bit in preparation for Gamescom and a couple of the other events. But that's kind of just tantalizing, right? Like, it's designed to get you excited about it, and like, it's not enough, right? Like, it's not enough. And it's funny that Alex, you bring up XCOM and the idea, because that guy makes the shot, like this, you're one of your little guys, right? Makes a shot. That guy's a hero now. He's your hero, right? What if that person is your friend? That's the thing that with cooperative gameplay is the most intense for me, right? Like, whenever I'm playing co-op games and I rescue my friend, or I perform an action that my friend is having trouble with, that is the kind of thing that like it strengthens our personal relationship, right? In a way that it's like, we're not actually soldiers, we're not actually like on a battlefield or anything like that, we're not actually assassins, but we now have like a stronger personal relationship with each other because we know we can rely on each other. So that's definitely the thing that I'm looking the most forward to. The thing that I am enjoying the most so far is the customization, because my assassin, it's kind of funny because I didn't think I would like the I'm not sure how to pronounce it, the Phrygian cap. Is that what it is? Mm-hmm. I didn't think I was gonna like it, but man, my assassin is totally rocking a Phrygian cap and a big old spear. It's like the opposite of any assassin that I've ever seen before. Stripy pants, Phrygian cap, big old spear. It's like, who is this guy?
I'm actually playing mine with a huge ass samurai sword.
Yeah. There's so many. I'm so excited to see people's different assassins too. Like, I can't wait to see like let's play videos and stuff with people progress through the game and to see what like loadouts they go with and stuff like that. It's gonna be amazing.
And it's cool. I mean, I agree with you with the whole thing of building on friendships and creating cool opportunities where you're actually going to get to have your friend or you be the hero for the group, right? One of our I mean, you mentioned the heist missions, right? And heist missions, when you're playing with 2 players, it's a cool experience, and you can probably play with strangers and have a really good experience. But when you're playing a heist with 4 players, now this is really where we're gonna start rewarding like friendships and having people be really a tight group, because stealth, unlike combat, the more people you add, the more of a challenge it is, right? So the more you have to coordinate, and this is really a mode for players that are really familiar with the game. They have this, these friends where they almost have this non-verbal communication, and you can just, as a squad of 4, try to break into this place, sneak in, steal the treasure, and run away. And seriously, we've played, like a bunch of us have been playing for a while, and as you become better and better at the game, and as you become better playing together, it really rewards you, because you start getting those feelings where you don't even have to communicate with your friends. Like, you just like boom, takes out the guy. He was going to take him out because that's what needed to be done, and you start really behaving like a really tight squad.
No, you're absolutely right. I managed to play a little bit not too long ago, and there was a section, without going too much into detail, but there's a section where there's a window and there are 2 guards inside, and we need to get in there to try and get the treasure. But those guards aren't going to come towards the window because they know better than that. They could be assassins out there. So my buddy had to make themselves visible long enough to get the last known position to attract the guard to the window, and I'm just hanging underneath the window, and he just pokes his head out, bam, pull him out, which attracts the other guy to the window, and my buddy is now on top of that window seal. I shuffle out the way, air assassination onto the ledge. We both go in, just loot the place and get out. I was like, that is fantastic. That was so much fun. I had the biggest smile on my face. I'm with Gabe in that. I'm looking forward to seeing how the community just rallies around that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how people take on the missions, because there's so many, there's so many different ways to approach it, and with the more players you have, the more coordinated you have to be. So no, that's fantastic. I think we're probably going to end it up there. Thank you for joining us and talking to us about Unity. I'm sure you must be looking forward to launch now.
I can't wait. I mean, after working so long on any project, I mean, we do this because we're passionate about games and because we love the fans. So part of the reward is actually waiting for the game to be released and, watching the fans' reaction. So I can't wait.
Have you had a chance to meet that many fans actually during the campaign?
I mean, that many fans. Every time we have, for E3, stuff like that, every time we have, these events, of course, we're there. And, with Gabe, we all often set up, events where we can actually meet some fans.
That's awesome. Okay, so speaking of fans, we always ask this. I think I know what the answer is going to be here, but I'll ask anyway. Do you have any social media that you'd like to plug that people can follow you on?
I don't have a Twitter account. I always joke with Gabe. I don't have the Twitters.
It's like 5 for 5. Wait, how many is it though?
We're batting 4 for 4 now. The last 4 people we've had on the podcast haven't had Twitter accounts. Yeah. And Gabe's always happy because he's like, I don't have to worry what they're saying on Twitter.
Yeah, this is what the PR people always tell me. Thank God you don't have a Twitter account.
Okay, so there you have it, folks. Alex doesn't have any social media that you can follow him on. However, Gabe is on social media. And of course, Assassin's Creed is. So I'm going to let him give you those links.
True. I will be the target. But actually, no. So for all the latest news and information about Assassin's Creed, all things Assassin's Creed, you can go to www.facebook.com/Assassin's Creed. You can go to twitter.com/Assassin's Creed. You can go to assassinscreed.tumblr.com. I believe. I get this one wrong every time.
That is it.
And then also Instagram.com/Assassin's Creed. We're there too. If you want to talk to me, it's UbiGabe on Twitter, and Twitter's probably the best way actually, because there's a Facebook, but I never look at it. It's the worst. I don't look at it.
Okay, and then of course, in a similar vein, Assassin's Creed Initiates is on Twitter as AC Initiates, on Instagram.com/AC Initiates. You will probably listening to this on the SoundCloud, in which case subscribe to it. If you're listening to this on YouTube, then you know where the channel is. You can subscribe to that as well. If you'd like to talk to me for whatever reason on Twitter, I'm EscoBlades on Twitter. And on that note, we're going to sign off. Thank you for listening as always. Take care, stay safe, and see you next time.